listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and it feels like it's been about 6.5 years since our last show. But we're back. We're here bringing you our content every 2 weeks as usual, for now, at least. Let's start with the intros. Mike Sr., how you doing? Get right to it.
I'm doing well. How's everybody doing? You just stole my thunder a little bit there because I was going to say that was the longest 2 weeks of my life.
It really was. And we are also joined by one Mr. Kevin Durso, blessing us with his presence once again on this Easter Sunday.
Thank you for having me, guys, as always. And I don't even know if it's that it feels like the longest 2 weeks or like I can't believe we've done 3 shows in this time. And I think we're all going absolutely insane right now.
It'll be a month,
with the stay at home.
Couple of days. Yep.
Yeah. Like all the stay at home stuff. It's just, we're going crazy. I think we're just going crazy.
Yeah. You're sick of your family, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm not sick of the 4 walls around me. That's what it's like. I'll do anything for outside presence.
Yep. Everybody thinks they used to know what the word stir crazy meant or the phrase stir crazy meant. They didn't know.
Now.
They didn't know. Now everyone knows.
Yep. And during this vacuum, we obviously have not had sports. Mike Sr., I know you're a big movie guy. We've talked about it on the show. What have you been up to during the quarantine? Have you been watching any good movies? What have you been up to in general?
I've seen a couple of decent movies, a few that I've already seen before, just rewatch. But more so, I've been doing the binge watching of some of the series, like Ozark series 3 is terrific. Stuff like that. That's most of the time. But again, I live with the 1.5-year-old, so we watch a lot of Frozen.
All right. What about you, Kevin? Anything good going on in the Durso household?
Not really. I mean, here's the thing. I'm doing kind of what I did before all this too, and it's I wasn't really watching a ton of TV anyway, and I'm kind of still not anyway. I'm trying to disconnect a little more during the day. I know I can tell you that I'm trying to disconnect a little bit, but I don't know. Just hanging out, trying to figure out what I can do to drum up some content in the meantime when there's nothing else to talk about. So I had a decent week with it this time around. The first couple of weeks, it was like, give me anything, please. But this week was not bad.
Yeah, Kevin, I've seen you pushing out your content at 97.3 ESPN and Sports Talk Philly. And, our listeners can definitely find all your stuff there. We'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, we're definitely working on content. And one of the places that we're pushing out content is on Twitter at YWT Podcast. And one of the things we did there was the poll, and we talked about it on our last show. We argued about the Final Four. We have results to talk about, and boy, Mike Sr. has opinions. But make sure to follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. We're going to be doing more tournament style voting like we did here. You can also find Mike Sr. at Mike from S Jersey, Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Our stuff's over on Sports Talk Philly too. We're around, but let's get into this bracket. Senior, you want to take this one?
Yes, absolutely. I know this is a Flyers podcast, and I have to say, everyone listening, you are a huge disappointment to me. This fan base is supposed to be a smart, intelligent, well thought, informed fan base, and you proved in 2 separate results on this Twitter poll that you are none of that. Bobby Clarke beats Bernie Parent, which I can live with in the final. I voted for Clarke, but he beat him at a 3-1 clip, which tells me the fan base is woefully uninformed and uneducated and unknowing about Bernie Parent. So much so that he almost lost in the previous round to Claude Giroux. I love Giroux. He's a terrific player, an all-time top 10, maybe even top 5 Flyer. He doesn't have any business being anywhere close to beating the guy most responsible for putting hockey on the map in Philadelphia. And by putting them on the map, I mean being responsible for their first and only 2 championships that without him, they do not win. They may not win them without Clarke either, but they cannot win them without Parent. Okay, for him to finish in a 51-49 dogfight with Giroux in the semifinal, again, fan base, I'm sorry, it's a disgrace.
And you were a completely unbiased participant during the voting process there,
yeah,
right?
If I don't get involved, Parent probably loses. I called it with about an hour left.
Election meddling 2020?
I called out the fan base and what a disgrace it was. And I think Parent got the last 3 votes or 4 votes in that last hour So I feel like I put my finger on the scale, and I'm actually disappointed a little
Certainly
bit.
sounds like a little vote tampering, if you ask me.
Yeah, I probably in hindsight shouldn't have done that. I should have let Clarke just beat Giroux in the final 90-1. So,
but what if he doesn't, though? How mad are you if we sit here talking about Claude Giroux, the greatest flyer of all time?
Oh, God. That would have been even worse. For
we might have had that. We might have had to mark that podcast Clarke. E for explicit.
Yes. If he takes down Perrant and Clarke in back-to-back polls, yeah.
Oh, Captain, my captain.
Yeah, I actually wish I didn't put my finger on the scale.
Oh, man.
To see that happen, so I could really, really lose my...
See, we're talking about content.
SHIT.
That would have been some content right there.
Correct. I wouldn't be spelling out SHIT.
Yeah.
Either way, Kevin, what do you think about?
I said, Kevin, am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, you're not. No, you're not wrong. And here's what I will say about, because we started to talk about Claude Giroux on the last show, and we talked about what we define as greatness or whatever. I think Claude Giroux is a great for this era, and I think that one of the things that I think is misunderstood about Claude Giroux is that we're going to look back on his career in 15, 20 years and go, this was a top 5 flyer based on everything. He'll have played in probably the second most games, assuming everything with the rest of his career shapes up the right way. And he'll probably, depending on how much longer his career goes, he might be the second flyer to reach 1,000 points.
Scoring a lot of those points on pretty poor teams.
Correct. And that's what I'm saying. I think there will be a great appreciation for his career in 15, 20 years as an all-time great. But no way, shape, or form should he beat a guy who won 2 Stanley Cups by getting shutouts in the deciding games, a guy who won 2 Vezinas as the best goalie in the league at that time, as a guy, let's put it this way. Here's another thing, too. How often do goalies win the Hart Trophy? It's not often.
Pretty rarely.
And he didn't win a Hart Trophy, but he came in second the one year and fourth the next. That's unheard of, it's unheard of the goalies ranking.
Two Conn Smythes. I mean,
for the record, Claude Giroux does have a couple of Hart podiums in his resume book. I believe he also has a second and a fourth.
Well, look, you don't become an potential all-time flyer by having a pretty good career. No, the fact that he is
Jay Voracek was on that list.
The fact that he is a potential top 5 flyer, you should have a couple of top 5 Hart finishes, or you're not an all-time flyer.
Yeah, right.
That's how you become an all-time flyer.
I almost wonder with the way that with the way the results shaped out, and that if people weren't, it says best flyer of all time, not your favorite.
Right.
And that's the thing. I understand everybody who's watching in this era, a lot of people are big fans of Claude Giroux, and they should be. That's been the guy for the last 10 years on this franchise. But it doesn't take away from the history of it. I mean, were you asking, here's the thing, Saturday was the 4-year anniversary of Ed Snyder's passing. Were you asking that day what Claude Giroux thought about it with the history of it as a current flyer? Or were you asking Bernie Perrant and Bobby Clarke what it was like from the early days when you had to form a foundation of a fan base from nothing, where they talk about how they had a welcome parade for the team and no one came because no one knew what hockey was. Right. Those are 2 guys who established what hockey is in Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
That's the point of it. So when you're talking the best, those are the 2 best. And I'm glad they both made it to the final. It should have never been that close between Bernie and Giroux, and it should have been much closer between Bernie and Bobby. It should just be – it has to be.
Now, Kyle can't seem to wrap his head around the disparity in votes between Clarke and Perrant at that 3-1 margin. He feels like a 3-1 margin is the same as if Clarke had won at 51-49. It's just the same.
Hold on, let me propose the same thing that I proposed to you before the show. Kevin, who's a better player, Scott Laughton or Michael Raffl?
I'd say Laughton.
Okay, I agree, and I think if you asked 1,000 people, probably somewhere between 900 and 950 of those people would come to a similar answer. That doesn't mean.
Go ahead.
Okay, even if it's 850 or 900, even if it's not quite that high, I think a large percentage of people would come to that same conclusion. That doesn't mean that he's 95-5 better, Scott Laughton to Michael Raffl, but it's close but clear.
It going 75-25 in Clarke's favor doesn't mean Clarke was 3 times better than Perrant. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what the fan base is saying when they pick Clarke. But they're saying that it's not really a question. It's clear going into the poll before the poll even starts. When a result goes 75-25, That's like I said, if you put Gretzky versus Jacques Lemaire in a poll, before the poll even starts, Gretzky's winning that 99-1, maybe 100-0. Okay, put it in there with Gretzky versus Mario Lemieux. Gretzky's almost certainly going into the poll. He's going to win, but it's going to be a lot more 70-30, something more of a level playing field than it would the other issue. Okay, so
but it should be 95-5 because Wayne Gretzky is always on an individual level for each individual person answering the question. Wayne Gretzky is a better player than Mario Lemieux.
It's not though. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that think Lemieux is the better player.
That's fine. I personally disagree.
Yeah, but
and that's fine. I disagree too. Like I would pick Gretzky in that poll too, but I'm not saying that there's not people out there that don't think Lemieux is the better player. There's a lot of people that do.
I can make the argument Lemieux was the better player, and I wouldn't. I'm saying I could. Okay, but I don't think you could make the argument that Lemieux had the better career.
Well, then maybe the issue, like you were alluding to,
right.
Maybe the issue is that this generation didn't see as much of Bernie Parent as they did of Bobby Clarke, even in highlights. It's harder to convey a goalie's greatness via highlights showing some saves, I think, than it is to convey a skater's highlight by showing some goals. Well, I think it's easier to look impressive scoring goals than it is to look like a goalie who has a 152 goals against average through a playoff run. It's hard to show that.
Well, from that sense, you're right because of the fact that if people were to watch highlights of Bernie, then you'd see the evolution of the goaltending style in the league.
Yeah.
So a young fan who knows what a goalie does now is going to look at what Bernie's doing and maybe not think it's impressive. The problem I have with it is it doesn't it shouldn't matter in that sense. He was the best of his era.
And arguably, it was even more impressive when you look at how much net there is with the padding to protect.
Right.
And I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing the greatness of Bernie Parent. I'm not. I know that he deserves to be right in this conversation as the 1A, 1B in terms of greatest flyers of all time. But I think it's harder to get that across to a new generation.
I think that's fair.
I think, like I said, when you think about the Flyers, you think about I growing up. Okay, I grew up thinking about Bobby Clarke, the GM. So of course I hear all about Bobby Clarke, the player, because I'm looking at Bob Clarke, the GM, night in, night out, hearing, seeing him 3 times a week. Whether you want to shake your head or not,
no, but you're taking me right back to my argument.
You don't hear about Bernie on the same level, right, wrong, or indifferent. You hear about Bobby. You heard about Bobby Clarke more than any other Broad Street bully from 1990 onward, in my experience.
Yes,
from what I recall,
he was their heart and soul for 15 years. I understand that, and he belongs in the top 2. And I think he should win.
And he overshadows every other bully.
Let me try to explain it one more way.
Okay.
I go to the Twitter. I pull up the poll.
I go to the Twitter.
Okay. I go to Twitter, whatever. And it's
Bernie the internet machine.
It's Bernie Parent versus Bobby Clarke. And I go to make my selection, and I can't. Okay. And I pick it up the next day.
Is it because you didn't know how to use Twitter?
No, it's because I couldn't make a decision.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm watching the egg on the roof, and I'm waiting for something in my head to make the egg roll one way versus the other, because I can't do it myself. I can't figure out which way this egg should roll. And I finally come up with I come to the conclusion, for whatever reason, and I won't go into it right now, that the egg should roll to Bobby Clarke's side. And I picked Bobby Clarke on day 3.
Okay.
All I'm saying is, if 100 other Flyer fans are as informed as they're supposed to be and as knowledgeable as we're supposed to be, every single Flyer fan should be in that position of not knowing which way to roll that egg. And an egg is not going to roll 75% to one side in any situation. So this should not have been a 75-25.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go with. I'll do it in two ways. First of all, because I'm going to counter Kyle's point that everybody knew more about Bobby Clarke than Bernie, and that is, I think that as GM, Bobby Clarke was working more often than he was being a man of the people. And Bernie
Fair to
Perrant
say.
has always been a man of the people from the
people
time his
love
career ended.
Bernie.
So
They
people
love
love him because he's out there. I don't think,
Yeah, if
I don't
you're
feel
on
like
a
you
boat in
see
Margate,
Bobby Clarke.
Bernie's there. Yeah, I know.
Everybody loves Bernie.
Right. Like, but my point is, I mean, Bernie's walking the concourse at games and things like that. Like, you're able to run into him, and all of a sudden, like, you could blink and walk by and go, wait a minute, do a double take. I just saw a hockey legend, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest Flyers to ever play, and one of the greatest goalies to ever play. And you almost don't even realize it because he's walking around like a man of the people. And Clarke was working through that time. He had a very important job to do in a franchise. So that was, I think that almost, like, that should have connected people more to Bernie, because anybody who went to a game with their parents in the 90s or in the 2000s who saw Bernie would be going, like, you tell me what parent isn't going to point out, hey, by the way, that's a great, everybody should be. That's the point of the education of it. Now, I will say this. I'm right on board with this. How long did we spend on the last show trying to go back and forth over which one you'd pick between the two? It's an impossible decision, it feels like, and you have to really consider it. So I'm not surprised that it doesn't. That's why I think that's where Mike Senior's point is right. You should be weighing this decision. Which one? I mean, we could sit there and go back and forth for at least 24 hours just on, well, Bernie got the shutout in the deciding game in a Stanley Cup final, but Clarke scored the goal in game 2. So which moment's more important? Like one doesn't happen without the other, but Bernie was so great in the whole playoffs, and so you're going back and forth on that, and it should take you a day to figure it out. Yeah,
I think I figured it out. I think I solved this issue. I think you guys keep talking about Mike Senior specifically, keep talking about the fan base should know their history. If this fan base was as educated as they should be, if et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Guys, it's Twitter. I think you guys are forgetting. We did a show 2 shows ago about how many bandwagon fans were coming along for the ride. How many new fans that this team had picked up. No. Let me finish this out. We saw a surge in popularity. Kevin, I don't know if you see behind the scenes numbers at Sports Talk Philly, but I assume that numbers across the board have gone up for a successful team that is running hot towards the top of the league, looking like they're going to, do some damage in the playoffs. We saw our numbers go up on our back end here. I think people are more casual than I think you expect them to be. Senior, I think a lot of people just kind of catch the Flyers when they're on and have fun talking about it, but don't know that Bernie had a 152 goals against in that playoffs. I think there's a casual level here, and on Twitter, you see polls retweeted, you click a button and move on. I think we're missing that aspect of the conversation. I think a lot of that casual fan base did just see Bobby Clarke as the GM. And they know that Bernie was this great goalie.
Yeah, but you just don't
convey it.
These Twitter people weren't really very informed in the whole Bobby Clarke time. That was 20 years ago when he was GM.
Well, I mean, Twitter didn't really exist 20 years ago, but
no, but more people on Twitter are going to argue about the worst time they can remember was the Holmgren days. Not even talking about Clarke as GM. He's right.
Well, right, but again,
if this went 60-40. I'm not even having this conversation. I could see.
Right.
It's possible Clarke wins this 60-40. Okay. Again, I voted for Clarke.
Right.
It's just not a 75-25 situation. It's just not.
Say what you want. We've broken down how close, they both did great things statistically, and they both won hardware, and it might come down to just as simple as Bobby Clarke wore the C, didn't wear a helmet, and was a visible face his whole career on the ice and off. Bernie wore a mask for his whole career and then went away for a little bit before he came back as the alumni guy.
Clarke was, and until they win Stanley Cups again forever, will be the face of this organization.
Behind Ed Snyder, you are 100% correct.
No, even to today, even to right now, you think Flyers, the first thing you think is Bobby Clarke. I get his win. And also, the Giroux 51-49 almost beat a Perrant is even worse than Clarke winning 75-25. Don't get me wrong. Clarke deserved I thought to win. I ultimately voted for Clarke, like I said. The Giroux almost beating Perron is even the bigger disgrace, because it bleeds into how little fan knowledge there is of what Perron accomplished, that it could be that close. And it explains how he loses to Clarke 75-25.
Yeah.
And my problem with saying that it's Twitter, so people are going to be maybe uninformed, or they might not bother to do anything more than look at it. This is a technology age, and you have a lot of time on your hands at this given moment with everything that's going on. It's a little thing called YouTube. Go look up some stuff and watch some stuff. And not only watch stuff like, hey, try to find a highlight film. Go watch what people say about these players. And realize that when Bobby Orr is going on there talking about Bernie Perrant and Bobby Clarke and, and any other great around the league, I mean, they do that. They're doing that with, they did it with Lindros too and things like that. Like, people will talk about what it was like to play those guys and how you had to try to prepare, and good luck actually playing them because they're intense on this level, or he was this. I mean, they don't sugarcoat this stuff, especially now that it's so far in the past. Like, they're willing to sit there and talk about how great these players, where other teams are. I'm saying other teams, legends. Go watch some stuff. Like, that's how you become educated. I know I've been using this time to fall down the YouTube hole on multiple occasions because it's just entertainment. It should be entertainment.
And Kevin, that's perfectly said, because that's what this fan base has been purported to be. They're supposed to be that fan base that does that. And if you're going to take the time, to participate in the poll, you're not a casual fan. You do know something about the Flyers.
You just click a button on Twitter real quick. It doesn't necessarily mean you're participating in every poll or blah, blah, blah.
Then you're poo-pooing the whole process.
It's not that I'm poo-pooing it. I'm sorry if it comes across that way.
I can't poo-poo the process and then bring passion to it. It was a big thing. It's
not that I'm attempting to poo-poo it.
Of all time.
It's not that I'm attempting to poo-poo it. I think the three hosts on this podcast, myself included, represent one of the hardest core levels of fan. And I think we're all pretty much on the inside. Kevin's literally in the press box, every home game. Like, we don't get much further inside than we are. And I think that you guys are kind of forgetting that there's levels of fandom, and this thing spirals out way further than the hardcore, tight-knit group of people that have this same intricate knowledge that you have and that we have as this hardcore inner circle.
No, I'm not forgetting it. Here's the thing. I can understand if people are browsing through, come across a poll, and the poll is Jeremy Roenick or Keith Primo, and they just pick a button. Both those guys don't have the longevity of their Flyers careers for people to go, gee, I really need to dig deep on this one and figure out which one I think. They might just look and go, it's a coin flip. I'll pick Primo. I'll pick Roenick, whatever. And I can see them doing it even down to a level of, what's another first-round matchup of, like, Pronger, Forsberg, or even Leclerc, Timonen.
Yeah.
Like, I can see it on that level. When it comes down to Clarke playing Lindros or Clarke playing Perrant, and that's the two matchups toward the end, if you've been to a game and you didn't look up to see what names are there and at least try to have some knowledge of who those people are, then you're not living up to the fan base. Simple as that.
Thank you.
Like, it's there. It is, and it's not just like, that's not the only representation of those players. It's just, hey, retired number banners. The history of it is everywhere. That even when they play a rival, they are showing old clips. When they play the Rangers, it's not just Claude Giroux's hat trick against them that got him into the playoffs a few years ago. It's Dave Schultz beating the crap out of a player too, because they got to go back to that.
Yep.
The name escapes me at the moment. I know
Dale Rolfe.
Yeah, there we go. But I was going to say, it's still like, that's on every highlight reel when they play the Rangers, because that's from, what was that, from 74?
73 or 74, yeah.
So, like, that stuff doesn't go away. When they play the Bruins, they're still showing clips of McLeish's goal.
Yep.
Or Clarke's overtime winner or whatever. Like, they're still showing clips of that because it is part of this team's heritage.
Okay, right. Well, and this fan base is supposed to embrace all of that and be that special fan base. All I'm saying is, after this poll, to me, I question the specialness of the fan base a little bit anymore. And I know it's only, it's not representative of, 200,000 people or 200 or 300,000 fan base. It's not a huge sample size, but it's still an indictment, however small it is.
And it's fair to look at, look, there's going to be bandwagon people. Here's the thing. For how many years in this city where the Phillies were the greatest thing out there and the ballpark was filled every summer, And then as it slowly fizzle away, well, then the crowds disappear and it's not appointment television anymore. It happens. And for the better part of the last 10 years, this franchise hasn't given people a lot of reason to necessarily be there all the time. I understand that. Now as it was getting good again, people were starting to show up.
Yeah,
that's going to happen. But at the same time, if you were watching this team as recently as 2-3 years ago when it was the 50th anniversary celebrations, they're having alumni games all over the place with these players participating. They're showing you retro clips galore, and they're having special nights dedicated to fighters and like the tough guys and the goalies and captains. And it's not like they're just doing it. Like you're literally getting a crash course in that in one season.
Right. It's not just the fan base that embraces the history. The team itself embraces its history, like you're saying, in a big, big way.
Well, you know what? Then it sounds like, and I don't even necessarily disagree with this. It sounds like you guys are laying out a little bit of a challenge to the fan base. And right now we have the perfect opportunity for fans to catch up on their history, to do their research, to go watch that HBO Broad Street Bullies documentary that everyone on earth needs to watch. I'm not going to say it's available for free on YouTube, but like if you search, it might be there. I'm just saying.
It's, as far as I know, it is. I've watched it during this.
I don't know if it's there with licenses, so I'm just going to say that it's there.
It's there. I'm telling you, it's there.
But you know what? That actually works out really well, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on this show, but I talked about it a little bit in our conversation offline. I think our next Twitter poll is going to be the greatest games in Flyers history. And I want to match up kind of a similar number of games that we just did for the best player conversation, and do best games. And people can track these games down, hopefully, and watch them. And we can have a lot of fun with this. So send your suggestions in. I listed off a couple in the group chat. We're kind of working on the list behind the scenes. But send in your suggestions. What's the best single Flyers game you have ever watched? The best Flyers game of all time. And I think we're going to do a poll over on Twitter at YWT Podcast.
I think the one thing we probably want to do there is just kind of define what you mean by best or greatest.
Okay.
Is there a fun element to it, or is it strictly the importance of it? Like obviously Game 6 against Boston.
I would like there to be a fun element to it.
Because there's a regular,
the more dramatic, the better.
Mine that is one of the great, one of the greatest Flyers games most fun games I've ever seen. That was the Ottawa game.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
that was a lot of fun. Yeah, and
this one is going to be much more subjective than the player poll, because
it's going to be hard to get angry about any results.
We should have some common ground on the players, because there's either defined as part of the great history that this franchise has, or it's a player that we've spent a lot of time watching, and that's how the votes get swayed in favor of maybe, say, like Giroux getting a lot of traction, because a lot of people just focus on, well, I've watched him for most of his career. For a game selection, you're going to do it maybe based off of different factors. Maybe you remember where you were when you were watching it. Maybe you were there. If you're physically there, it might be your greatest, just because you can sit there and say, I was part of that crowd, and
absolutely
that makes it a big deal. Or, whatever, or it'll be the magnitude of it, just in general, the magnitude of the game, like we're talking about. But from a fun angle, it could be fun to see which games stand the test of time for different reasons. Like Mike Senior said, the Ottawa Brawl game. Like,
absolutely,
that's so fun. It's a fun game. It's probably the last of its kind that I can remember.
I would say for the Flyers at least. There have been a couple
around
of
the
games
league.
Since.
There's not really anything like that. I mean,
guess
you don't
not
see
to that level, because it was just brawl after brawl after brawl.
Oh,
it was really insane.
It was so much fun.
And I do want to try to put a little bit of a focus on regular season games, because I think postseason games are going to be emphasized, as they very well should be. Mm-hmm. But I want to try to find some gems. I want to try to find some, even the Columbus game from earlier this season, where they score 5 goals in the third period and come back from a 3-goal deficit. Fun stuff like that.
Well, hopefully find something comparable to that than some of this past season. I don't know. I don't know if that's a classic.
Well, no, but I'm saying
it was the most significant game they played this year. It was the most important game for when it was played and what took place after it and what had taken place before it. I think it was their most important win of the season. That I do think. But go ahead.
But either way, games like that, games that have some gravitas, the shootout game in 2010 against the Rangers, I think is going to be one that everyone
It should be.
springs
It
to mind.
absolutely
And
should be on that grouping.
it's essentially a playoff game, but for the purposes of this, obviously it did happen in the regular season.
And I would also encourage people to not necessarily think of the result completely too.
Yeah.
You can have some great games that the team was involved in that they unfortunately don't win. I'm not saying that they're all going to make it.
No, I wouldn't hate to see a loss or two.
I would sit there and say if we were really getting extensive with it, and maybe not doing like we just did with the players.
We do like 64.
Like if you would, I would sit there and say the 2012 Winter Classic is one that you might consider in there because just of the atmosphere.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like
the first ever fight in the Winter Classic, I believe.
Well, that was 10.
That was in Boston. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
but they don't win that game. But it was the atmosphere and like the setting, the backdrop, the amount of fans at that game.
Yeah,
like that still has some element to it as a regular season game. I don't think it would make it because of the fact that you can put a number of playoff games in there and then you're still digging for regular season games. But just factor in things like that.
One of the really, really good games that I remember that they lost that could be in there is the Game 6 to Chicago, the overtime loss. As heartbreaking as it was, what transpired to get the game to overtime, and if you win
that game's over.
but you're feeling that if we can get this overtime goal, I mean they got that game to overtime.
Yeah.
So to be in overtime, we felt fortunate to be in overtime. And hey, if we can get this goal and get to a Game 7, we got a shot to win the cup. Unfortunately, as opposed to Game 6 against Edmonton.
Do you put that game in here? By the way,
get the Daigneault goal to win the game with the Game 6 game against Edmonton.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that.
That's actually probably my most memorable game as a fan. I was 11 when they won the cup, so
there's a big loss. Yeah,
yes, I have. No, they won Game 6 against Edmonton.
I'm sorry.
Right.
That was in '87. That was they were down by a goal with like 6 minutes left. Prop scores a power play goal to tie it. 3 minutes later, Daigneault scores a goal, on a nice move, a nice shot, and the roof just literally comes off the place. And I remember exactly where I was and who I was with and the reaction of everybody in the room when Daigneault's goal goes in. Much more memorable, not as important, but much more memorable to me than, than the Flyer Bobby Clarke teams winning the cup in 74 and 75. Again, I was 11. So it just didn't ring as well with me in my head as when I was 23.
Yeah, and I'll throw it. Well, here's the thing too, because try not to be too recent with it, but for a regular season game that I can think of that was memorable, I just recently, I think it's the next one in my series that I'm doing on playoff series and review that I've been writing for both 97.3 and Sports Talk Philly. But
make sure to include links in the article.
Leading up to the 2012 series that they played against Pittsburgh, where they won.
April 1st game.
Yes, they played a game on April 1st. They ended up winning it.
Peter Laviolette standing on the bench.
Laviolette got up on the bench at the end. That's a memorable moment in a regular season.
They literally almost fist fought. They really
did.
They really got close.
And believe me, like I'm like when I'm doing these series, I'm not trying to focus on wins only. I have the Chicago Stanley Cup final,
but the wins are more fun.
The wins are more fun. But here's the thing. I've kind of started by sending people into depression. I think because I started with the last playoff series. I'm doing reverse chronological order, and I'm doing like 10 of these, or maybe a few more. Quite honestly, but I started with 18 against Pittsburgh. Well, that's a loss.
Oof.
And 16 against Washington. Well, that was a loss.
You'll get to 2010 soon.
Well, then 14 against the Rangers. No. Finally on Monday it'll be the Pittsburgh series from 2012.
Sweet.
So that's a win. And then unfortunately it'll be the Stanley Cup final in 10. But then we're doing the Boston series of that same run.
Yeah, you get a really good. And
then a couple. There's going to be a couple in there from 04, a couple from 2000. I think.
Sounds like a really fun series.
But one of the things I wanted to bring up, because Mike Sr. brought up the 87 Game 6, I'm going to possibly make the argument that might not just be one of the greatest. That might be one of the greatest Stanley Cup finals in history.
It was terrific.
In general, and I know they don't win the cup at the end of it, but just from a standpoint of, I went back, I found and shockingly enough, you can find, and it's with Gene Hart's commentary, which is even better.
Yeah.
Clips of every single game from 1 to 7, all of them spaced out. And I watched the whole thing, and when you realize how close that series was throughout in many different senses, it could have gone either way. It might be, and to look back at the roster, first of all, the Flyers roster probably has Well, it only has one hockey Hall of Famer. Mark Howell's the only hockey Hall of Famer. The number of Flyer Hall of Famers is pretty astronomical.
That team, if not for the Edmonton dynasty,
Right.
that team is beloved because they win a couple. They win at least one, maybe a couple cups.
There might be. I'm trying to think about it because I believe there might be. Believe it or not, I think there might be maybe 1, 2, or 3 Flyers from that roster that are no longer with us.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I know that there's a handful. Zezel's one of the first ones that come to mind.
No, he was
not Lindbergh, but
he was the 85 team. I'm sorry.
There might be. I think there's a couple. I think there's a couple.
I think McCrimmon's gone.
McCrimmon's on. Yeah, McCrimmon's on there. And then you go over to the Edmonton side. Edmonton had 6 Hockey Hall of Famers on that roster.
It's scary how good that team was. Probably the best. That 80 from 79 to 87. That run Edmonton had, probably the greatest team ever.
And in fairness, by the way, because I'm wherever I can find video, I'm linking to each game where people can watch highlights. The Game 7 video clip from that 87 series actually pulls up the quote that Gretzky said afterwards about Hextall being the toughest goalie he ever had to face.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty big compliment from the greatest goal scorer of all time.
Correct.
Just out of curiosity, the two of you real quick while I got you.
Mm-hmm.
That Oilers team plays a 7-game series with the Detroit Red Wings of the late 2000s. How far does it go and who wins? I know you guys just said that you both have the Oilers, so I think you got them. But
the Red Wings of the late 2000s or the late 90s?
I'm sorry, the
97, 98.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Yeah.
That was the Larionov and all the other Avs on that team.
All the Russians.
It's a little tough because, I'm trying to pinpoint each thing. Edmonton had the better goalie, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%.
Grant Fuhr was the better goalie.
I think Detroit's probably a deeper forward core.
Well, the defenseman is tough because a lot of Lidstrom's excellent.
Yep.
Paul Coffey was really great in his heyday too. So that's almost a toss-up. I think that's a pick 'em.
That Detroit defense, they were so deep. They had, a lot of people forget, they had Larry Murphy on that team. That's how good that team was.
Yep.
They were so good.
From a forward standpoint, I think Edmonton's probably got the forwards, though, because, I mean,
they have the forwards over any team.
Well, here's the thing. You could just mention Gretzky and Messier and stop there, and you're going crazy. Yari Curry's like an underrated part of that team, and he's a Hall of Famer in his own right. But he's almost underrated because he's not the first 2 names that come to mind. That's how bad, that's how good that team was.
I mean, could you imagine you're playing the game, you watch Gretzky go to the bench, you're like, okay, here we go, and you line up, and you got to look across
Messier.
It's like, Jesus.
Even Glenn Anderson's a forgotten part of that team to an extent.
Tremendous. And a money player. Asa Tikkanen was like the Claude Lemieux of his day, where it's just money in the playoffs.
What's really going to be funny as I do these series, as I'm reviewing them too, is one of the ones I think I end up doing later on is the 97 series against the Rangers that got him into the final, and the number of Rangers who were part of the team from Edmonton back in the 80s, Tikkanen was on those teams.
They really got the band back together.
I think they had Charlie Huddy too, and maybe Kevin Lowe. They had a number.
They had a lot of them, and between Messier shuffled around a few times between the Rangers. He was with Vancouver for a time in the 90s and things like. But Gretzky eventually made his way over to the Rangers too. It was the Rangers have had a lot of legendary players for even just a brief period of time.
Yeah, they have.
Even down to when Jágr played there for a brief period. The Lindros time there. I mean, they're all Hall of Famers.
Gretzky played in New York for a little bit, right?
Yeah. Gretzky was part of that 97 team, so I'd already I threw him in there. But even in years after that, when Jágr played there and when Lindros played there for a little, and
turns out millionaires like living in Manhattan.
Well, I mean,
I know there's more to it than that.
I tend to forget, and I'll do it when I do the 04 series against. I believe I'm doing the 04 one against Toronto in the grouping of series I'm looking at, and I forget that Brian Leetch was a Leaf for a little while.
Yeah,
I just think of him as a Ranger. I just
absolutely.
associate him with the Rangers.
Yeah, I don't even have a picture in my head of him as a Leaf.
Because Keith Primo scores a great goal going around him. I mean, it's the twilight of Leach's career, of his great career, but he had clearly lost a step by that point, and Keith Primo was speeding around him, and it was and not only that, but it was deeper into the playoffs. So Leach was the type who would play so many minutes and just be a workhorse type that he was going to be possibly battered and beaten down and not have his best at that time.
Right. Yeah, I'll use great Keith Primo goals to bring us back by mentioning the 5 overtime game. because that's going to have to be on our list.
Yeah, that's certainly on the list.
Going back to our greatest games list, that's got to be there, right?
I mean, and that's a hard one for me because I'd love to sit there and probably make it the greatest one that I know of.
I'd love to sit there and watch the whole game.
But at the same
today.
time, like if I'm going to sit there and say, gee, I want, like, where was I when all that happened?
I was asleep because I was in like seventh grade.
I was in grade school. I wasn't allowed to be up for that. So I was, I found out the next morning, like a lot of people did, that they had won
the game only ended an hour and a half ago.
Right. So there is some benefit to being 55. I'm sure that's where the benefit ends, I'm sure.
Well, you got all this history about Rick McLeish and Bernie Perron, so we can't take that away from you.
People forget how good McLeish was. 22 points in that 74 run. He had a hell of a run.
All right, so
more points than Bobby Clarke. Just putting it out there to the fan base so they know who he was.
Well, listen, like I said, we got people have plenty of time nowadays. YouTube is an infinite resource.
For this one especially, though. For this poll especially.
Absolutely. Go down, find some games for us, send them to us on Twitter at YWT Podcast, by the way.
Hey, Kevin, can you send me that stuff on the 87?
Yeah, I'll find it. Yeah,
I'd love to watch all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll put it in our off-air chat room, and
Appreciate
I'll share it because that'll be it's excellent. I mean, about the only downside I can find to it is it's because it's done like a highlight, like that, almost like the way the championship videos are done.
Right.
They actually slowed down the footage on the goals a little bit, unless it was like a really strange play. So you're watching the goal in slow motion, and unfortunately, like it makes the game 7-1 worse. Because when Glenn Anderson scores with maybe about 3 minutes left, and that's when it's over. And Gene Hart's voice. Then Gene Hart's voice says it all because he says that'll do it right after it goes in, and you can hear the deflation in his own voice. I believe he's doing that on a national scale, if I'm not mistaken. So even on a national scale, he's not doing it for the local.
Right.
And but you can hear the deflation in his voice just from. Oh, like that so close.
That was how many years ago? 43 years or whatever it is, 33 years ago. Yeah. And I can still, as you're talking about it, the disappointment in my chest, I'm getting crushed because I can see the goal going in. And here's what was so horrible about that goal. Obviously, Hextall, you said what Gretzky said about him.
Mm-hmm. And he won the Conn Smythe.
That goal was so bad. It was a wrist shot from the point, and Hextall goes to his knees, and it goes under him.
Right. Yep.
And it was only 2-1, and they had just won the game before, losing 2-1 in the third period. They just came back to win, so you still had that belief like this is going to be magical. And then when that goal goes in, and it was for such a great playoff run to have given up such a bad goal. It was just deflating on so many different levels. And
and I went and as I was watching it, I went back and I'm looking at box scores as I'm piecing together. The number of times they trailed by maybe 2 or 3 goals in that series early was quite a few, actually. I mean, I think they only scored the first goal in 2 of the games out of that series, maybe, and one of them was the Game 7. We've talked about that, I think, on both of the previous shows, so we'll mention it again. Shout out to Murray Craven. And,
last time they had a lead in Game 7 of the final.
But it's just in general to look at that, and the first couple of goals that Edmonton scores in that game are not really bad ones by any stretch. Curry takes a great shot. And you're looking at, I don't believe that anybody, I believe all 3 goals were by Hall of Fame members of that team.
Yep.
So it wasn't like it was a shock that those guys were the ones doing it. I mean, it's going to be no different than saying the Flyers lost their last cup final because Patrick Kane scored. Well, Patrick Kane's probably going to be a Hall of Famer down the road. And you go, well, what are you going to do about that? I mean, it's a shame that it was as fluky as it was in 2010, and it's kind of the reminiscent of what Mike Senior's talking about with, Glenn Anderson didn't exactly take the greatest shot in the world there.
Right.
Okay, it happens. So
yeah, again, but just for a guy who was playing so good,
and Hextall was playing so well in that series.
Well. It was almost like he was like the fighter on the ropes who just got hit one too many times, and he was almost like he was too tired almost.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and speaking of being too tired, I got one more thing before we get out of here. I'm gonna do the plugs here real quick. Make sure you can follow us on Twitter, YWT Podcast. And I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but that does really help us out. And we are doing things over there to stay engaged during the Corona times, as they are being called. We're over there at YWT Podcast. Mike is at Mike from S Jersey. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Mike Jr. is at Mike_Giletto. He's the one who's running all these polls. But before we get out of here, and don't forget to follow us on Sports Talk Philly. Don't forget to follow them too. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, sportstalkphilly.com. We're everywhere. Before we get out of here, one last topic, and I think this one's going to be fun, and we're just going to let this go as long as it goes here. Three teams across all of sports that you just can't stand. Your top three. And what I'm talking about, you can name either a franchise, like the Dallas Cowboys. You can name an era, like I hate the Tom Brady New England Patriots. Or you can say a specific year. I hate the 1996 Green Bay Packers. Why not? So top three teams throughout all of sports that you hate. Mike Sr., I let you have a little more time with this prompt, so we'll let you go first.
1 and 2 are easy for me.
Okay.
The Dallas Cowboys.
As I say, I believe these are going to be franchise blankets here, huh?
Yes, pretty much. Okay. Pretty much. The 1962 through 2020 New York Mets. So every Met team that's ever existed. I can't stand their. I hate the team with a passion, and I hate their fans even more. They're just a disgusting fan base. Just that whole self-entitled.
Just a disgusting fan base. Okay.
Oh, it really is. It's just a disgusting fan base.
A disgusting fan base.
And number three, I will go. I'm going to split right down the middle because at different times. Nah, you know what? Forget it. No, New York Rangers, number three.
Okay.
I hate the Rangers.
So we went with three franchise blankets here. Okay.
Yeah, there's no
specific eras or teams or
look,
no.
I can tell you some Mets teams like the '86 team that I hated, more so than the '90, nondescript '97 team or whatever. But just as a whole, anytime that team is anywhere near my TV, they make me want to vomit. I hate that team with a passion.
Okay. Kevin, what do you think?
I mean, this is tough, and part of the problem that I have with it is that for the years that I've been part of the media, you learn to but you learn to distance yourself from hating something to respecting it in certain ways.
And like fair.
Well, give us your basketball, football, and baseball.
Well, here's
top
the thing.
three.
If you want without specifics, you can just say a team.
Well, no, here's the thing. I can sit there and talk about hockey teams from my childhood that I sit there and
say when you were 12, who did you?
Well, right, exactly. But here's
Nolan, San Jose Sharks.
No, but here's what I mean when I say that. I will find a way that if I am interacting with a Yankee fan, I will not sit there and diss one of their greatest, any of their great players. I will respect the history of those franchises in the same way I try to, we just talked about the history of the Flyers.
Oh, so you're just a nice person? Where's the fun in that?
Well, no, I didn't. Doesn't mean I don't.
Let's go back to senior.
Hold on. It doesn't mean I don't dislike seeing teams win. I try to find the good in their players. If they are going to win, then I'll sit there and I'll go, well, I'm not going to dispute talent.
You attempt to respect greatness.
Well, exactly. I respect greatness. I'm not part of what I mean when I say that is that do I really want to keep seeing the Patriots win? No, I don't. And it drives me nuts that they do. But at the end of the day, I also remember telling a friend of mine who's a Patriots fan, hey, when the Eagles won their Super Bowl, it feels that much better that it came against the greatest quarterback that we've ever known. It feels like, or arguably the greatest. Right. And there's something better about beating the best. And I respect Brady immensely for being a great quarterback and then being able to watch a team beat him the way that the Eagles did. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't mean I want to keep seeing him win, though. So for that respect, from that angle, from that sense, I say the Yankees right off the bat.
Okay.
Because if first of all, if there's a team that I always hate,
any team on earth is pretentious, it's them.
Well, it's not just that. I always hated the concept, and it's a little weird to say because I do feel like for a long time, the Flyers tried this angle before the salary cap era. You can't just buy your way to winning.
Yep.
Like, you don't just buy the best players and hope it works. You need to really form a good
Hatcher
unit.
forever isn't a good idea.
I don't even think of Hatcher that much. I think of I think of Brizgalov. You don't just buy the guy and trade away what you developed. You mold it. You needed to mold it, and you could have molded Bobrovsky, and instead you got this guy, and you realize because we paid him so much, we've got to keep him. That's and then you traded Bobrovsky, and that was not necessarily the right way to go. And I'm not saying that keeping Bobrovsky means that they would have won a cup. It just, I think it was a better, like, you're learning what happens when you develop some certain areas. That's mainly what I'm saying with that. But the Yankees, I always felt, with a team that tried to buy their way into it. And they would always have these great players. And for a little, for certain points, it would work. They haven't won a World Series since 2009. And of course, I'm partial to that one because it quite frankly, like, it could have happened here. They could have been celebrating here. And thank God they didn't. But that always just didn't sit with me the right way. That series, they would, they did all the times they did win. And again, I respect Jeter immensely, and I respect a lot of those guys. I think I really didn't like that 2009 team because I had feelings about A-Rod, and I had feelings about a lot of those guys.
A-Rod was easy to hate.
Yeah,
man.
A-Rod was what put it over the top for me. Outside of A-Rod, I actually, from the 94, whatever, when they started that run, before A-Rod got there, I actually, of all the Yankees teams that I hated, and I do hate them, I actually respected that Paul O'Neill, Bernie Williams.
Yeah, those
Jeter.
guys. I like those guys
Darryl
too.
Strawberry.
They really weren't by the championship Yankees. That team really was. The sum of the parts were way better than the individual parts themselves. They were really, really a cohesive team that if they were down by 2 runs in the bottom of the ninth and Paul O'Neill's batting, he's not trying to hit a home run. He's trying to get a walk to get on first base, because without getting on base, you can't get the tying run up. So they really played the game that way. But once A-Rod joins that squad, then they lose me.
Yeah,
right,
they're
and by the time 2009 rolled around, it was A-Rod. I mean, Jeter
correct.
was the developed guy, and it wasn't just Jeter, because Jeter was there, and Rivera was there, and Posada was there, and that's fine. But beyond that, it was, here's Mark Teixeira, and here's Johnny Damon, and here's, you can keep adding to the list.
Giambi was on that team, wasn't he?
He might have been. I don't remember.
One of them was.
Was
it Jeremy? Jason? One of them.
Jason was the Yankee. I know that. I just remember he was still on the team at that point.
What bothered me most about that 2009 team is that's the one time that A-Rod actually had a decent World Series, and it had to come against us. He was a flatliner.
Yeah, they had gotten Sabathia that year too, and that was another one where you're going, well, gee, just buy up the pitcher too, like, and that's not to say that the Phillies weren't doing somewhat of the same thing at that time. They were making deadline trades, and they were really mortgaging the future from development standpoint, but it just felt like that. It felt like the Yankees would go all out, find a way to get the top free agent, and then make the top trade every year. And it became just annoying as anything. I mean, look, I'll throw the Cowboys in on mine too, because if you're not getting up on a Dallas Sunday in Philadelphia ready to go to war, kind of, then you don't have a soul. Kind of, it's correct. Like that. That's just the way it is. You get so hyped up for those, and with the way that football dominates the city in general, in terms of attention and hype and everything like that, you have to get up for those 2 Sundays every year. And I think, believe it or not, and it's not that it's a shame of it, but I feel it's a little bit of a shame that we haven't seen an Eagles-Cowboys playoff game in a little while. You have to go back now. I feel like
this is the first time recently that they've actually been sort of good at the same time.
Right.
The last couple of years.
Like, I think
it's been a long time that they were both decent.
You're going back now, I think, almost 10 years now, to the time where they actually would play playoff games against each other. And I'm not talking, I'm not talking about wild card weekend, like you want to kind of see them both be around where Dallas is the one ahead, or the Eagles are the 2, and Dallas is the team that gets there, so it's a divisional game, like a little further in the playoffs. With some, I mean, it feels like gone are the days when they would meet in the conference championship, because it's just the way that it's structured is different. I mean, maybe this new structure that they're talking about might create for some of that again, but who knows?
I think it has more to do with the fact they really just haven't been terrific teams at the same time. I mean, even this year when they played in week 16, the next to last week, and the winner kind of going to the playoffs, there's still both 8-8 teams that are fighting for that.
Yep.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
You got to go back, like I said, almost 10 years to when they played that last season-ending game where the Eagles smoke them like 55-10.
They turned around and played each other the 2 weeks later, right? Or the following?
The Eagles knocked them out of the playoffs that year.
Right.
Knocked them out of playoff contention. That game winner goes to the division. That's the day like 6 things had to break right for the.
Yeah.
Right. I know there was another day, another year where they played back to back in like week 17 and then the first week of the playoffs.
Right.
And that helps stir a rivalry.
I think that was more than 10 years ago. Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
But how much do you guys remember the Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin years?
Not as
obviously
much.
We're talking 90s. So.
Football wasn't really one of the sports I focused on in the 90s per se. I started to get more into it around 2000-ish. Shortly after McNabb joined and Reed was coaching the team.
Started swinging.
And as soon as that kind of around that golden hour, I mean, by that point I was only 7 or 8, so it wasn't like I was jumping on a bandwagon per se. It was more or less, it just wasn't. Hockey was so my sport going through the early years, and as football became even more, like, I think they kind of crawled out of this dormant period. The Eagles did. And
right.
As soon as they had an evolution, it was on all the time, and I don't think we've stopped watching ever since. It's just, and there's been some bad years, but
it's hard to get excited for Ray Rhodes coaching the team.
Well, I mean, I was a kid.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
That Cowboys' success is what breeds the contempt for the Cowboys.
Yes,
definitely.
At least in the 90s, there were some bad teams, but there were some very good teams too for the Eagles. At least they were able to play on the same field. In the 70s, where the hatred was born, I mean, we were going, 1-12, 1-13, 2-12. I mean, we were terrible, and the Cowboys were winning Super Bowls. That's where the true absolute hatred for the Cowboys was born, and then the 90s just drove it home even more.
Yeah,
definitely. All right, so Kevin, who's your third team here?
Yeah, number 3.
You've been putting it off.
Well, it's tricky for me because I don't know if I have a third franchise per se, so I might just jump into like
and go to an era or a year
or an era or whatever. Because I'm not the biggest basketball guy, so I don't really have the same hatred for any basketball team that I would for.
I'm in that same boat.
I do want to highlight. I mean, if there's an era I can think of, maybe I guess I'll say to start it around from, and I'm not saying I remember it from the very beginning, but I guess the 95 to 2005 Devil was one that really gets to me.
Remember, I was going to split the Rangers with somebody. I was going to split them with the Devils. I hate that team. I hate that team. I hate Brodeur. I hate Stevens. I hate Niedermeyer. I want him dead.
I mean, the thing, because I think that because I don't really remember too much. I don't remember too much about the Red Wings from the late 90s that vividly. I know the players well, but I think I know the players better from. I probably played my first hockey video game in that time. So when you're playing that stuff, I mean, I would research stuff, but I don't remember watching that final that much. I definitely remember the 2000 playoffs and that series against the Devils and the way that ended. It's one of the first times that you remember something like it just shattering you.
And it wasn't just like one time. There's the Claude Lemieux goal in Game 6 that just broke your heart. There's the Stevens hit that breaks your heart. There's so many Devils playoff moments that I hate that team.
Well, and the thing is, there were so many, like there were great moments from the first 4 games of the series where the Flyers get the lead. I mean, that Boucher save on Elias can get played over and over again.
Yep.
And then from there, like what highlights the series? It's the late goals. It's the Stevens hit on Lindros. That's what people see. And here's the thing too, because one of the pieces of content that you guys were pumping out for the YWT Twitter account was 4 players that shape your hockey life or whatever it was. And the first one on my list, surprisingly, it wasn't a Flyer. It was Mike Modano. That's the guy who I idolized growing up.
Right.
The Devils played the Stars in that Stanley Cup final, and I wanted Dallas to win that series so badly, and it didn't happen. And that was just as devastating as the Flyers not making the final. I can only imagine what would have happened if the Flyers did make that final, though. I always dreaded the thought of a Flyers-Dallas Stanley Cup final.
I
love Modano that much.
I hear
it would have been cool.
But I think the Flyers win that cup. I mean, obviously you got to play the games, but I think the Flyers were a better team. I really do.
Yeah, and
that's probably the third one I'll throw in there, though.
How about you, Kyle?
Okay, my list. Number one is the Penguins because I can't stand the Penguins.
I'm glad one of us got him in because I hate them too, and I'm glad we're going to talk about.
And you know what? Philly represents a really nice segment of hate because I'm also going to check somebody off in the football category that I don't think got the appropriate mention. I really hate the New York Giants. And I
thought about them.
And I understand that, and I'm going with them solely so that they are represented. Don't you worry, because I feel they deserve a spot on this list. I feel like
for as much as I'm putting the Cowboys on there because that's like on my list because that's what people that's the hype Sunday.
That's
like
the one, right?
Well, I feel like from a local angle, I know more people who like the Giants than I do the Cowboys.
Yes,
and
that a lot more North Jersey transplants
because of that.
Right?
Because of that, I feel like it becomes even more of a topic for conversation. And I can be sitting on Twitter on a Sunday against the Giants and see much more activity than I do when it's Dallas.
It's a little more interpersonal. It's a little more Civil War.
I feel like if there's any Dallas fans I do know that are Cowboys fans. No, it's not that. I feel like I see that on Facebook more. Like the Facebook audience is the Dallas side. And then if I'm watching a game and checking Twitter during it, then I'm seeing more Giants fans.
Well, that makes sense because Facebook tends to be about 10 years older than Twitter. And, the Cowboys haven't been relevant in a time frame for about 10 years older. That makes sense. Timeline-wise, that tracks out.
No,
I think the Giants have had also just more success as a franchise recently.
Era. Yeah.
And it makes them get a little bit, the Twitter muscles come out a little bit.
For sure.
Dallas fans are doing it, but I don't think they do it on that same level right now. Like they really need.
Right, they don't have.
They don't have a leg to stand on.
Right.
They don't have anything to puff out. Right.
And here's another reason why the Giants were a good bring up, Kyle. What frustrates me the most about that franchise, and I do hate them, is you look at some of
Michael Strahan's tooth gap, because that's it for me.
When you look at the success, they get the Scott Norwood wide right Super Bowl win. That they should lose. They should lose that game. They have the 9-7 team that beats the Patriots in the first Super Bowl with the friggin' helmet catch, and then they beat the 18-0 Patriots in the Super Bowl. Another team that went 9-7 with Eli making a throw on the sideline in between two Patriot defenders. That's like one of the greatest throws of all time from a complete idiot moron. They have the three most clearly should never have happened championships in the history of sports.
Yeah,
they do. But here's what I will counter with. By that point in time, I enjoyed it more that the Patriots weren't winning Super Bowls than the Giants.
I was rooting for the Giants.
I was rooting for the Giants both times.
Yeah, absolutely. At that point, I totally
solely because of the fact
Patriots
that
were the big
it's the Patriots, and the most recent memory we had was from an Eagles standpoint was that 04 Super Bowl against the Patriots. It was
absolutely.
That was the third one. It's like you don't get another one for right now.
And that was right around when we were mad about Spygate.
And he got three more anyway. So
yeah.
And right about then, we were learning about how bad Spygate was and how they probably cheated to beat us. So we had a little bit of
I can understand that
one.
And your number three?
My third team. I'm gonna fudge this a little tiny bit. 2004 teams from Tampa Bay. Because in that year, you had the Eastern Conference Finals where the Dave Andreychuk Tampa Bay Lightning win, so Dave can go fulfill his destiny, win his cup, whatever. Vinny LeCavalier, Martin St. Louis. I hate that team so bad. And then, meanwhile, across town, you have Joe Juravicius running down the sideline because Blaine Bishop can't cover somebody.
I think he's still running.
He is. When the vet came down, he was still running through the rubble, man. Joe Juravicius. Why do I know that name in 2020? The only reason I know Joe Juravicius' name is because when I was 12 years old, he tore my heart out and stomped on it.
Correct.
No, the person who tore my heart out from that one was Rondé Barber.
Right.
Oh, Rondé Barber. Yeah. Rondé Barber is the one who tore my heart out.
But it all came down to Joe Juravicius for me.
Because McNabb just kept throwing on the football in the fourth quarter.
But it's really funny. I do want to tell a quick little story. So I grew up. My parents are separated, and my mom didn't really care about sports. But when I went over to my dad's house, he cared a lot about sports. The problem was he was a Bears fan. So he watched this game with me, and he casually likes the Eagles. He's been on this show. He talked about it. He supports the Eagles because they're his hometown team, but they're not his favorite. And so he looked at me and goes, Well, you're an Eagles fan now, kid. Congratulations. This is your moment. You know, he compared it to the Phillies in '64. You know, he compared it to like these big iconic collapse moments.
Biggest loss in Eagles, biggest, most tragic loss in Eagles history, without a doubt.
And it really, and for me at 12 years old, you know, the situation was perfect. You know, the Tampa Bay had never won when the temperature was below 50 and it was like 12. You know, Brian Mitchell runs the opening kickoff deep into territory. Deuce Staley punches it in a couple plays later.
Yep.
You're ready to roll. You're the destiny team.
Correct. It would have been like the Flyers losing game 6 after Kate Smith sings the
the last game ever in the Link.
Right.
Like the last game ever in Lincoln Financial in the Vet.
If it was
that was the first year of the Link, wasn't it?
No,
it was the last year of the Vet. The last game ever in Veterans Stadium.
If it was a movie, they would say this shit would never happen in real life.
No.
Well, and then they play. Didn't they play Tampa Bay to open the Link?
They opened the Link in the preseason.
Correct.
Yeah. They opened the Link in the preseason.
No, regular season. It was a Monday. It was a
Monday night game or Sunday night or Monday night.
Something. It was a night game.
Thursday night, whatever it was. It was a night game to open the season.
And but yeah, either way, 2003, 2004 teams from Tampa Bay. That's my answer for the third, because I don't know if any city has jobbed Philadelphia that hard that twice in 6 months.
Correct.
I don't know if that's ever happened.
That was very good, Kyle.
Tampa Bay that's a very good one, and I'll level with you because I mentioned something about we were talking about the games bracket we're going to put together, and I said
Game 7.
I said Game 6 of that Tampa series for the Flyers needs to be in the bracket, no question about it, and for Mike Senior, because your son put in there that was, I think, was it the last time that you were one of the first times he cried over a game or something. I'm like,
right.
I could feel them welling up too.
But you know what?
There's a clearing attempt that happens with about 10 seconds left in the game.
Oh my God, I know the one.
And it's when you know, and I'm like, my head just dropped.
But you know what?
Because I loved that team. It was that was the year I went to my first playoff game.
But you know what makes it all worth it?
I love that team.
Who did the Phillies beat 4 years later?
Yeah. That's true.
The Tampa Bay Rays.
Well, here's
Tampa.
Take that.
Bite me.
Look, I'll take that they played Tampa Bay because I don't know if I would have wanted a part of Boston in that one. It was hard enough watching the Eagles play the Patriots the second time around.
Listen, we were title starved. I would have taken any opportunity we got.
No, I know, but I had a feeling that they had a better shot against Tampa Bay than Boston. That's
absolutely all. That will always be one of the greatest what ifs. And that's my list. And you can let us know what you think of your list. What's your list? Who are the 3 franchises you hate the most? Is Broad Street Hockey one of them? Who knows? Either way, we're moving on, and we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Kevin, is there anything you wanted to say before we get out of here?
Not really. I think we covered it all.
All right. And Senior, yourself?
That was good. Everything went well.
All right.
Oh, you know what? Hold on, Kyle. I do have one thing I want to bring up because
go ahead.
We threw it in the group chat yesterday, and I think we should mention it about Colby Cave.
Yeah.
So I almost forgot about that for a second because
in case you guys haven't heard, young piece in the Oilers system. I don't know if he's a prospect, whatever you want to call him.
They're calling him a prospect. I mean, he's still
25 years old.
He's just barely out of that age. He was just barely out of that age limit where people are still kind of calling you a prospect.
Either way, a young man named Colby Cave in the Edmonton Oilers organization. On Monday night, he suffered a brain bleed. I'm sorry, and was put into a medically induced coma. He was, I don't know if he was taken off life support. Either way, his fight ended yesterday and he did not win that fight. And we just wanted to put out there that we're sending our condolences to him, his family, his friends, the Edmonton Oilers organization, really every NHL player, because it really is a fraternity. So one person goes down, and I'm sure every NHL player is feeling it today. And our thoughts are with Colby.
That's sad.
Yeah,
I saw it in a lot of places. A lot of players who would not have even played with him, who were putting some things out there about it.
Yeah,
I believe I'm trying to find it as quickly as I can because I know we're like wrapping up the show here. One of the first, I won't say one of the first years I covered the Flyers, but somewhere early on, in my time doing that. Every now and then I got to go up and do a Phantoms game in Lehigh Valley. And one of the early ones I remember doing was against Providence. I'm checking to see if he was in that game. That's what I'm trying to look for. Because I may have actually, I don't recall him, aside from maybe a preseason game, I don't recall him playing in Philadelphia as a member of the Bruins.
Right.
Let me see if he's on this roster. Yeah, there he is. He had
He
2 shots in that game. So
There
I
you
did.
go.
So he was in this game that I remember covering from probably back in about, 2015, I believe.
Right.
So, and that was really early on. I mean, by that point, he was probably just turned 21 maybe, and he was just getting started on his career. He was still a very young prospect at that point, and he had a good junior career too. So he was talked about and got a couple of chances at the NHL level. He played, I think, 65 total NHL games in his career.
He never really broke through and made too much of an impact. But either way, he was a big part of that organization. And every single person who has ever known him talks about how fantastic of a person he was. And and again, we do want to extend our sympathies to the Edmonton Oilers and everyone involved with this.
Yeah, it's just it's heartbreaking. It's devastating. It's you really puts a lot of things into perspective about not just everything that's going on in the rest of the world, but here's a 25-year-old that probably didn't even expect anything to be wrong in this situation. And next thing you know, you're gone. And he got married less than a year ago.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense, and it makes you think about a lot of things.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be thinking about him in the 2 weeks between this and our next show. And so yeah, we wanted to extend those sympathies, and we did also want to reach out and support your nurses, support your local restaurants, support people who are working in this time, grocery store workers for sure. We appreciate those who are providing services for us, I think now more than ever before, or we should be. And please, for the love of God, do not be a horrible person to these people. It is not their fault that the grocery store does not have toilet paper. Please be a decent human being. They don't want to be at work any more than you want to be there.
Do we have a positive? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and a thank you to them goes a long way.
Yes,
definitely.
Yes. A positive.
and yeah, anybody who's doing anything are superheroes right now. We have to acknowledge that. Anybody who has to do something on a daily basis right now that's outside of a home, you're a real life superhero right now. So thanks for everything that they're doing to make sure that everybody else is trying to stay as safe as possible. And
correct. They're making it possible.
They're making it possible. And all we can do is continue to listen to the people who are trying to tell us the right thing to do right now, which is to just stay here and do whatever we have to hunker
down,
time until we can get back to some sense of normal. But
deal with the board.
Kyle, do we have a positive spin we can put on the end of this now? Because I feel like we've been the positivity show for most of it, and I kind of brought it back to
I know, and before
I felt the need to do it though. Hockey is a fraternity. We needed to be
mentioned. Absolutely,
especially when it was put into the group yesterday.
Absolutely necessary for sure. And I will try to get us out of here on a happy note, but I do also want to point out that you mentioned that our essential workers are superheroes, and that's all well and true. And the efforts, I'm out there. I'm not sitting here tooting my own horn, but I'm out there working in a non-medical field at all. But I also believe that we as a society need to do a better job of compensating those people for this, heroic work that they are doing, this essential work that they're doing. And I hope that they are taken care of either now or when this is all over. And that is just my opinion. On the good news, we are now closer to hockey than we have ever been in the last month. Where every day we are one day closer to things coming back, whether we think that or not. We're staying positive. The NHL is remaining optimistic, at least publicly facing, about finishing the season, getting some level of playoffs in. I remain confident they're going to do so. Because I really hope they do so, and I miss hockey. Either way, I think the most fun story for me will be how teams handle the fact that all their players' contracts expire on June 31st. And I'm sure they'll work it all out. I'm sure there's a plan in place.
Yeah,
they'll figure it out some way.
But either way, I'm having a lot of fun with that. So,
I will say this. I will say this about these scenarios. I know that there's a lot of people out there, and I I'm one who's thought it too. How can you possibly think about trying to award the Stanley Cup with no fans to create the great atmosphere that playoff hockey brings? The longer this goes, the more likely you'll be willing to do anything in front of nobody that's physically there just
Absolutely.
to give people some entertainment.
Right, correct.
Like, fans will not care that they can't go if they have something live they can watch. I was getting entertained by watching video game streams on NBC Sports Philly with Jim Jackson calling it because
And hey, that was a lot of fun.
because it was something different. At least you didn't know what was going to happen in that moment. You're going, okay, I'll watch this just because there's actually mystery involved. It's not a game I remember being at 2 weeks ago or something like that, or 2 months ago or whatever it is.
Baseball could be back very shortly.
Yep.
And I would agree with
South
what they're
Korea.
doing too.
In South Korea.
Yeah.
And listen, no matter
They're
how
almost ready.
no matter how bad this gets, Dana White is building Fight Island. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to do some research. That'll get us out of here. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We are You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. Find us on Twitter at YWP Podcast. And that'll be it for this one. We'll see you guys later.